My name is Winona Pratt. I'm 31 years old, and at 11:42 on a Tuesday night in March, my brother sat at my kitchen table and slid a flash drive across the surface toward me. "I need you to look at these," he said. "Tell me which ones are the problem." I looked at the drive, I looked at him, then I asked what he thought I was going to do with them. "You work with numbers for the feds," he said. "You know how audits work, just help me clean it up before they get in there." My brother is 36, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who fills a room without meaning to. He runs a payroll processing company called ClearPath Solutions, or he did. He handled quarterly tax deposits for about 40 small businesses across Allegheny County, restaurants, dry cleaners, a couple of dental offices. His clients trusted him to collect their employees' withholdings and remit them to the IRS on schedule. He had not been doing that. I knew this because 7 weeks earlier, a referral had landed on my desk from the Taxpayer Advocate's office. A woman named Greta Hollis, 68 years old, owner of a Vietnamese restaurant in Pittsburgh's Strip District, had been receiving federal collection notices. The IRS was pursuing her personally for $214,000 in unpaid employee withholding taxes from the previous 2 years. She had canceled bank statements showing every quarterly payment she had made to her payroll processor. She had paid. The processor had not forwarded the money. I had been assigned to the case. The company was listed as ClearPath Solutions, LLC. The registered agent was a name I didn't recognize, a law firm that handled incorporations. I spent the first 3 weeks building the financial picture. In week 4, I subpoenaed bank records and ownership documents. The sole owner of ClearPath Solutions was my brother. I set the file down on my desk, stared at the ceiling for a long time, and then called the ethics hotline to understand my disclosure obligations. That was 11 days ago. I had not told my brother. I had not told my parents. I had not told anyone in my family, because I needed to understand the legal and professional lines before I did anything at all. The reason my family didn't know what I actually did for a living was partly my own doing. When I got my credentials 4 years ago, I told my mother I worked in federal tax enforcement. She announced it at Thanksgiving dinner. My father started asking every year whether his Schedule C looked right. My brother bragged to his friends that his kid sister worked for the IRS, and once, at a graduation party, a stranger cornered me to ask whether his landscaping business could write off a hunting cabin. After that, I let them assume I sat in an office reviewing spreadsheets. It was easier. I should have known that easier was a debt I would eventually have to pay. My brother showed up at my apartment at 11:42 without calling first, which meant he had been sitting in his car deciding whether to do this. When he came through the door, I could see it in the way he moved, not the brother who coached my soccer team when I was 9. Something smaller. He said a client had filed a complaint. He said the IRS had sent inquiry letters to 4 of his accounts. He said his bookkeeper had found timing discrepancies in how the tax deposits were being recorded. He used the word discrepancies 4 times in the first 3 minutes. I asked what the discrepancies were. He said some deposits had been logged as remitted, but the transfers hadn't cleared on the IRS end. I asked how many accounts. He said maybe 16, 17 over 2 years. I kept my face still. 16 or 17 accounts over 2 years was not a timing discrepancy. It was a pattern. I just need someone who understands the system to tell me which ones are going to be the flag, he said. If I know what they're looking at, I can get ahead of it. I asked what getting ahead of it meant. He looked at the flash drive between us. Amending the filings, explaining the cash flow gap. Amending federal tax filings to conceal a cash flow gap after an inquiry opens is obstruction. I didn't say that yet. I asked whether his attorney knew he was here. He didn't have one yet. I asked whether he understood that any attorney he hired would tell him not to alter any records. He said he wasn't talking about altering anything. He was talking about clarifying. I told him I needed water and went to the kitchen. I stood at the sink for a moment, then I came back and sat down. Before I tell you what happened next, and what the rest of that night cost every person in that room, let me ask you something. Where are you right now? What time is it where you are? I want to know how far this story reaches. At 12:08, My mother called my brother's cell phone. He answered, and 30 seconds later she was at my door with my father. I don't know who told her where he was going. I think he had called her before he came to me, and she had been waiting somewhere nearby. My mother is a woman who has always believed that love is demonstrated through problem solving. She walked into my apartment, looked at the flash drive on my table, and sat down across from me without being invited. My father stood near the door with his arms crossed, and the expression he used whenever he was about to say something he considered reasonable. "You can look at it without committing to anything," my mother said. "You work with these systems every day. Just tell us if there's something that can be corrected before this becomes a real problem." I said it was already a real problem. My father said, "He built this company from nothing. You have job security, a pension. If he loses this, his kids lose their home. My brother has 2 daughters. They're 6 and 9. I love them completely." I said that did not change what he was asking me to do. My mother set her hands flat on my kitchen table. "You're not being asked to lie. You're being asked to look." I said looking at concealed evidence for the purpose of strategizing around a federal inquiry was itself a crime. She frowned. "You work in an office, Winona. Don't talk to us like you're a prosecutor." That was when I understood how wide the gap had grown. My mother genuinely believed I sat in a cubicle reviewing tax returns. My father thought federal enforcement meant I sent letters. Neither of them had asked me a single specific question about my work in 4 years. Not one. My father pulled out a chair. "Here is what I know," he said, in the tone he used when he wanted something unacceptable to sound like common sense. "Your brother made errors in how he managed cash timing. Errors happen in small businesses. What doesn't have to happen is a federal case that destroys everything he built because his own sister wouldn't spend 2 hours helping him understand his exposure." I looked at my father, then at my brother. "Did you spend the money?" I asked. The room went quiet. "Keen, did you collect the withholding payments from your clients and spend them instead of remitting them to the IRS?" He looked at the table. "It was a cash flow thing. The business had a hard quarter. I intended to catch up." My mother made a soft sound. My father looked out the window. Not a timing discrepancy, not a recording error. He had taken money that belonged to his clients' employees, money withheld from their paychecks for federal taxes, and used it to run his operations, and then taken more, and then more again. "How much?" I asked. He said he wasn't sure of the exact number. I said approximately. He said somewhere around $800,000 across all the accounts. My mother made a different sound. My father sat down. I had not known the full amount. My investigation had traced roughly $600,000 through the document set I had assembled so far. The full picture was larger than I'd reached. I stood up, went to my home office, and closed the door. My hands were steady. My heart was not. I stood there in the dark and thought about my brother at 9 years old teaching me to ride a bike in our grandmother's driveway. Then I thought about Greta Hollis, 68 years old, who had received a federal collection notice for $214,000 in taxes she had already paid, whose restaurant had been under threat of levy, who had probably sat at her own kitchen table in the dark, not understanding what she had done wrong. I thought about the others, 40 businesses. Some of them were probably fine, in the sense that they had the reserves to fight the IRS themselves. But some of them weren't fine. Some of them were people like Greta, who did everything right and were being pursued for money they had already handed over in good faith. I came back out. At 12:51, my brother's wife arrived. She had left their daughters with a neighbor and driven over in her coat over pajamas, which meant she had also known where he was going. She came through my door and immediately looked at me with the expression of a woman who needed someone to stop making this harder. "You're his sister," she said. "Whatever you think of what he did, those are your nieces." I said I loved my nieces. She said, "Then help him." I said that helping him meant telling him the truth, and the truth was that amending records after a federal inquiry had opened would make his situation significantly worse, not better. She asked how I could possibly know that from where I sat. I told her I knew it because it was my job to know it, that IRS criminal investigations special agents are the people who build cases like the one being built around her husband's company right now. She stared at me. You're a special agent? My brother looked up. My father said, what does that mean? I told them what it meant. I told them I was a credentialed federal law enforcement officer, that I carried a badge, that my cases resulted in criminal prosecution, not civil penalty, that I had spent 4 years interviewing witnesses, executing search warrants, analyzing financial records, and presenting evidence to federal prosecutors. My mother said I had never mentioned that. I said I had told them I worked in federal tax enforcement, and they had never asked a single follow-up question. The room was very quiet. Then my brother said, Winona, are you on this case? I let that sit for a moment. I had rehearsed this in my head for 11 days. I had thought about what I owed him as a sister, and what I owed the investigation as an agent, and what I owed the people his choices had harmed. I went to my home office and came back with my work laptop. I turned it toward them. The case management system showed a file summary. The subject company name was visible at the top, ClearPath Solutions, LLC. Below it, the case number. The date opened, my name in the agent field. No one spoke. My father leaned forward. He read the screen slowly. He sat back. My brother said my name once, quietly. I closed the laptop. I identified the ownership connection 11 days ago. I have been in contact with our legal ethics unit about mandatory recusal. I am not the investigating agent on your case anymore. I cannot be, but the case does not go away because I step back from it. It transfers to another agent with a complete file. Everything already collected stays collected. My mother said, you've already reported him. I said I had reported the conflict of interest and the ownership connection, as I was required to do. I said the case file had been building for 7 weeks before I knew whose name was on the ownership documents. She stood up. You had 11 days to warn him. I said I had 11 days to understand what I was legally permitted to do and say, and I had spent those days doing that carefully, because I was not going to add my own misconduct to an already complicated situation. She said I could have told him to stop. I asked what she thought stopping meant for $800,000 in client funds that had already been spent. She didn't answer. My brother's wife sat on my couch and put her face in her hands. My father stared at the floor. My brother looked at me for a long time with an expression I couldn't fully name. Not anger, not exactly. Something more like watching a door close that he kept meaning to walk through. The restaurant, he said, the one that filed the complaint. I know which one it is. She kept calling. I kept telling my billing manager to send updated statements. He paused. She seemed like a nice woman. I said I couldn't comment on the investigation. He nodded slowly. He picked up the flash drive from my table, looked at it, and put it back down. Then he told my mother they should go. She turned to me at the door. The girls are going to ask where their father is. I said I was sorry, I meant it. She said sorry didn't seem like enough. I said I knew, but it was what I had. My brother was indicted 4 months later. The case was handled by an agent out of the Pittsburgh field office, whose name I did not recognize, which was exactly as it should have been. The charges included 31 counts of willful failure to collect and pay over tax, 2 counts of filing false federal tax returns, and 1 count of obstruction, based on a text message he had sent to his billing manager the morning after he came to my apartment, telling her to delete certain records. She had already turned her phone over to investigators the week before. She was cooperating. The man who had originally sold my brother the client list when he bought the company had filed the initial referral. He had discovered the scheme during a routine reconciliation and, rather than expose himself to liability, reported it anonymously. He had not been involved in the fraud. He lost his professional reputation regardless. There were 22 affected businesses. 11 faced IRS collection actions before the case resolved. A dry cleaner in McKees Rocks closed during the enforcement period, unable to sustain the levy. I read that in a local newspaper 3 weeks after I had already recused myself from anything connected to the case. Greta Hollis's collection case was suspended pending the criminal outcome. Her attorney told local press that she had spent 14 months believing she had made a mistake somewhere, that she had lost sleep, that she had almost sold her restaurant before the referral outcome was explained to her. Her daughter told the same reporter that her mother had worked 30 years building that place, that she had never been in trouble with anyone, that she still wasn't entirely sure what had happened or why it had happened to her. I read that and I sat with it for a long time. My mother called me twice in the 2 weeks after the indictment. The first call, she said, the family needed to come together. I said I agreed, and that coming together meant accepting what had happened and supporting my brother through the legal process, not finding someone to blame for the process existing. She said I was being cold. I said I was being precise. We didn't speak for 6 weeks after that. The second call came after his first court appearance. She asked me to write a character letter for sentencing. I told her I would think about it. What I thought about was the difference between a letter describing the brother I knew, the man who showed up with his truck every time I moved apartments, who remembered my coffee order, who called me after bad days at work, before he understood what kind of bad days I was actually having, and a letter that could be read as minimizing what 40 small business owners and their employees had experienced because of his choices. I wrote the letter. I said he was not a cruel man. I said I did not believe he began with the intention to harm anyone. I also said that intentions do not determine consequences, and that the people he harmed had not chosen their outcomes any more than he had chosen his arrest. I asked the court to consider a sentence that allowed him to remain present in his daughter's lives and begin making restitution in a way that was sustainable. I did not ask for leniency, I asked for proportion. His attorney said it was the most unusual character letter he had ever submitted. He said the judge had read it twice. My father never asked me to explain myself. He went quiet in the way he sometimes does. A quiet I used to read as disapproval and now understood as recognizing there was nothing left to argue. He called me on my birthday in June. We talked for 12 minutes about nothing in particular. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in 2 years. My brother wrote me a letter from the facility where he began serving his sentence. He said he understood now why I hadn't warned him. He said he had spent a long time being angry about it anyway, and that the anger had slowly turned into something he didn't have a clean word for. He said he thought I had loved him more by not covering for him than he had known how to understand in the moment. He said his daughters had visited twice and that they seemed, somehow, okay. He said he hoped I was okay too. I read that letter sitting on my front steps in late afternoon, with the sun coming through the trees in the particular way it does in Pittsburgh at the end of summer. I thought about what it costs to protect someone from themselves versus what it costs not to. I thought about all the times I had stayed quiet at family dinners about his business, made sounds of encouragement I didn't entirely feel, said, "That sounds great," when I had questions I didn't ask because I didn't want to be the difficult one. I thought about Greta Hollis, who had done nothing wrong and lost 14 months of sleep. The hardest moment of that night, harder than turning the laptop toward my family, harder than watching my sister-in-law cry, harder than my mother walking out without saying goodbye, was the fraction of a second after my brother asked if I was on the case. Because I wanted to lie. I wanted to say no. Of course not. I just work in an office. I just process paperwork. I don't know anything about your company. I wanted to give him that. I wanted to give myself that. I didn't, because I had learned something across 4 years of this work that I had never learned anywhere else. The truth does not become more bearable by being delayed. It only becomes more expensive. My family believed I was a minor figure in a government bureaucracy. They used that belief to decide I had nothing worth protecting, no standing worth respecting, no knowledge worth crediting. And when they needed something from me, they assumed the gap they had created, built from 4 years of incurious dinners and half-heard answers, was a gap they could walk through. They were wrong about that, but I had also helped build it, because it was easier, because I was tired of explaining, because I had decided that not being understood was less painful than the alternative. My silence did not protect me. It just meant that when the moment came, they were surprised. My brother finishes his sentence in 14 months. I don't know yet what the relationship looks like on the other side of that. I know I'll show up. I know I'll sit in my niece's living room and help with homework and bring the specific brand of chips they like and not make them feel that their father's choices are a weight they have to carry. I know I'll be honest with my brother about what I can offer and what I can't. I know I won't pretend the last 2 years didn't happen. My mother told a relative that I had chosen my career over my family. What I had actually done was refuse to accept that those were the only two options. That loyalty to my brother required me to become complicit in what he had done to Greta Hollis and 21 other people who had trusted him with their livelihoods. There is a version of this story where I look at the flash drive, where I spend a couple of hours identifying the most exposed records, where I help my brother understand which threads to pull to make the picture look cleaner than it is. I know what that version costs. I've built enough cases to know exactly what it costs. I chose differently, and I would choose the same way again, even on the hardest nights, even knowing what it meant for every relationship in that room. Because the truth was already in that room before I opened my laptop. It had been there for 7 weeks. I didn't build it. I just refused to help hide it. And sometimes that's the only power you actually have. Not to destroy what someone else constructed, not to punish, not to win, just to stand in the room and refuse to become part of the architecture of the lie. So tell me honestly, if you were sitting across from your brother at 11:42 at night, with a flash drive between you, would you have opened your laptop? Would you have let them keep believing you were just the government accountant? And what would either choice have cost you?